heart strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to Thee. Just a closer walk with Thee. Grant it, Jesus, is my plea. Daily walking close to Thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of toil and snares, if I falter, Lord, who cares? Who with me my burden shares? None but Thee, dear Lord, none but Thee. Just a closer walk.
All right. Daniel chapter 10. Let's look at the first three verses, or read the first three verses, and then talk about it. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, keep in mind, chapter 9 opened with what statement? In the 1st year of Darius. In the 1st year, and now we're in the 3rd year of Cyrus. So we've got some time that's elapsed. Who was named Belshazzar. A word was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belshazzar. Belshazzar was Daniel's Babylonian name. You remember that his 3 friends had been renamed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He had been given a name such as that as well. We don't generally remember that name and use that name. Interestingly enough, with his 3 friends, we don't generally remember their Hebrew names or use those names, or at least I don't. Mishael is one of them, and I can't remember the other ones. But anyway, and the word was true, and it was a great conflict, and he understood the word and had understanding of the vision. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for the full 3 weeks. We've got some time that's passed. This is the time after Babylon's fall, and now Persian rule has come about. Daniel is in some period of mourning. Are we told what that mourning is about? And the answer is no. We are told a period of time, though. How long has it been going on? 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, he has been fasting. That fast is defined as abstaining from meats, delicacies, and wine. Also, he specifies that during that time he had not anointed himself. What does that mean? Okay, he didn't pour oil on his head. Why did people anoint themselves in that way? What's he talking about? This isn't some kind of an anointing that was a ceremonial thing, like when they appointed a king, or when the high priest was put in place, where they did this in some ceremonial way. He's talking about something much more practical than that. Yeah, he didn't clean himself up, dress himself up, uh, and prepare himself to go out and be presentable to the world. He was in a period of serious mourning that lasted at this point 3 weeks, where he was just kind of there. What's he doing during this time? Well, he's fasting, and what I would have to assume, often accompanied fasting, he was praying. And God sends a message to him. And he has a vision. And that's what this chapter is about. That's also what chapter 8 was about. And I said you might notice a pattern. We're not being told everything that Daniel did. In fact, Daniel was in captivity in Babylon for how long? 70 years. He was an 80-year-old man by the end of it, 80-plus-year-old man by the end of it. His whole adult life he has spent in Babylonian captivity. We really don't get very many pictures of what he did over those 70 years. It's very, very isolated events, most of them surrounding what? Some bit of prophecy, some vision from God. Daniel was a prophet. And what's unique about prophets? What distinguishes prophets from the rest of us? Getting direct information from God to in turn do what? To share with man. Prophets were the mouthpieces, the spokesmen for God. God told them what he wanted man to know, and then they in turn told men what God said. Daniel is filling that role, and we are getting the snapshots where he got information and then recorded, this is what I saw. This is what I was told. This is his way of publishing the information that he was given. Uh, he didn't go out on the street, as far as I know, and preach. He wrote these things. And he says, in those days, I, Daniel. Verse 2, I think, is important. There's a lot of debate among people from time to time about the writers of various things and whether the person whose name is on this is actually the person. This person at least wrote, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I ate no delicacies, no meat, no wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for the full 3 weeks. And on the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl. What is beryl? Yeah, it's a semi-precious stone. It's somewhat blue and translucent usually. Light can pass through it. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning. I'm going to stop here for just a moment. Let's make the obvious observation. Is he describing something literal? Is he describing a literal man? An actual physical? You ever seen a beryl? A man that was made out of beryl and had a face with the appearance of lightning? No. So we've got figurative language going on here. Now, whether there was a literal presence doesn't matter. What matters is we've got clearly figurative language here. His eyes like flaming torches. Again, clearly physical language. His arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. What does that mean? The sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. Yeah, it was very, sounded more like a huge, you know, I relate things to my own experience. That's the only thing I can do. You ever been to a concert where the people on the stage invite the audience to sing along, and you're in a room full of 15, 20,000 people and everyone's singing at the top of their lungs? You ever noticed how powerful that is? That's what he's saying. This individual's voice was like the voice of a multitude. Wasn't someone speaking alone. It didn't sound that way, at least. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. Anybody else see it? No, so it didn't happen. There's no eyewitnesses. Uh, I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision. See, there were people there, but they didn't see what Daniel saw. Why? Why didn't they see what Daniel saw? That's an important piece of information, by the way, because it's a vision. It wasn't material things that Daniel was seeing. It was, and I'm going to use the word properly, immaterial things. We've come to use the word immaterial to mean things that don't have any value. That's not really what immaterial means. Immaterial means what? Things that are not physical. Immaterial things can be of great value. I alone saw the vision. The men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled to hide themselves. So they have some sense that something's happening that frightens them. So I was left alone, and I saw this great vision, and no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. Then I heard the sound of his words, and as I heard the sound of his words, I fell on my face in deep sleep with my face to the ground. And I'm going to stop there. Let's talk about this for a moment. Um, we have no identity of this character that appeared to Daniel. Never given a name. That's very different from chapter 9, isn't it? Who spoke to him in chapter 9? Gabriel. We know it was Gabriel. Who's Gabriel? A messenger or an angel sent from God. Traditionally, we view him as one of the archangels, like Michael. No name associated with his character, but he's described, and he's described with extraordinary glory. I don't think there's a better way to express his description than to say it was extraordinary glory. This idea of pure radiant linen clothing. This is not unique language to Daniel. This is language you see in various places. This precious gold belt. He identifies the source, not the literal source of the gold, but saying it's like gold from this particular place. That is, there are certain places where you can get certain precious stones and precious metals where the purity and the quality of them is unique. If I say Black Hills gold, anybody know what Black Hills gold is? That's interesting. It has specific interesting coloration to it. It's gold. There's some of it that's got a greenish tint. There's some of it's got a purplish pink tint. There's some of it that's gold colored, and it comes from the Black Hills region of South Dakota, and it's the only place you find it. There are certain minerals that are mixed with the gold that make that coloration, but it's quite unique to that region. And if you are looking at a piece of jewelry and they say this is Black Hills gold, there's a couple of things that you expect to see, and that tricolor nature is one of them. The other thing that you expect to see is a particular pattern, because they use grape leaves and vines a lot with that gold. But anyway, it's quite unique. Uh, there's a place, I think in Australia, called Mintaby, that the opals from there are very, very stark and different than opals from other places. They tend to have a green overall coloration to them. They tend to be bright, very bright, and absolutely stunningly beautiful. In fact, they're so desirable, they're actually hard to get a hold of now. They're quite limited in supply, and they're expensive because of that. He names a location indicating that this is special. This isn't just gold. This is special gold. Um, Body like beryl, face like lightning, eyes like flaming torches, arms and legs like polished bronze, a voice like a multitude. There anybody else that gets those kind of descriptions in the Bible? Christ and God. This description far exceeds that of, we're going to call them ordinary angels, um, elsewhere in Scripture. So I think it signals a supernatural authoritative presence that is quite different. Daniel's reaction is important as well. He falls prostrate. What is that a position of? Okay, it is a position of humility, reverence. What's the short word that we use most of the time? We don't get prostrate very often when we do it, but it's worship. It's a position of worship. And for instance, when the angel appeared to John in Revelation and John bowed down before the angel, what did the angel say? Get up. I serve God just like you do. Do you notice what's absent here? Is when Daniel falls prostrate, there is no correction, no stand up, no, that's not appropriate. And instead, we're told further that he falls prostrate, he becomes powerless and speechless, and like he's asleep, like he's in a deep sleep. Um, he's not commanded not to worship, which differentiates this encounter from other angelic appearances when people respond the way that he responds. I think that's important. The other thing that I think is extremely important is, let's see, what verse was it in? I don't want to go to verse, it's repeated in verse 16, but it happens earlier. Oh, there it is, verse 8. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed. And then down in verse 16, we're going to see it again. And behold, one in the likeness of the children of man touched my lips, and I opened my mouth and spoke, and I said to him, it's not there. It's not verse 16. It's another one. But anyway, radiant appearance is what I'm looking for. What does that conjure up memories of? Moses. When did Moses have a radiant appearance? When he engaged with God. And so I think you start putting this evidence together. We've got a description that is a description that's given to God in places like the book of Revelation. You have worship being offered by Daniel that is not corrected. And you have Daniel's apparent radiant appearance that comes about as a, and I'm persuaded that though Daniel 10 never explicitly says the figure is God or Christ, that the combination of all of this together argues that this more than likely is a divine or pre-incarnate Christ figure rather than just a typical messenger from God. Is Jesus a messenger? And the answer is yes. He was sent by the Father into the world to do what? To deliver his word. The words that I speak, Jesus said over and over again, this is an argument made repeatedly in the Gospel of John. The words that I speak are not mine. The Father has given me words to speak. Um, he was a prophet, Jesus was. And there are several epiphanies in the Old Testament, pre-incarnate appearances of God, that at least some of which we know was the person who would become Jesus when he was incarnate in the flesh. I think this is more than likely one of those occasions. He appeared to Moses at one point in a burning bush. Um, this is in this figure of a man, which, by the way, I suggested to you earlier in the book when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, for instance, were cast into the furnace. It says there was a fourth one who had the appearance of a son of man, which also is a phrase, a title that's associated with who? With Jesus. That was also a Christophany, I think is the official term for it. So anyway, I'm persuaded that that is the case, but it's very important to note that the text never expressly says that. You have to draw that conclusion from the things that the text does expressly say. And I think that the evidence is fairly overwhelming to draw that conclusion. And so Daniel receives this message and has this vision directly from God. That is significant. That also has, at least for me, another incident that comes into mind besides Moses. Moses is one such example. Do we have any other who had visions directly with God, who received some type of uh, authority? Okay, Elijah. Who else? That's actually a good one. I didn't think of that one. What about a young man named Saul from Jerusalem who was on his road to Damascus and had an experience in where he saw and spoke to Christ post ascension? They they knew something was going on. They were terrified, but they couldn't see or hear, make out. They heard sound, but they couldn't make out what was being said. Paul alone has this interchange in where he knows who he's talking to and he hears the voice and understands the voice and is uniquely positioned then to do what? To be an apostle. He now is an eyewitness to the resurrected Christ. Um, we see certain situations, very limited ones, very unique ones. I think that this is one of those situations where Daniel is set apart among the prophets as being one who received his message. By the way, when Paul would later get challenged in his apostleship, one of the arguments he made was what? That he had received his message directly from God. That no one had contributed anything to it, that it came directly from God. I think we've got the same kind of argument that can be made here about Daniel and his prophecy and the significance of it. and I've already been pointing this out throughout the whole class. This book is tied at the hip to the book of Revelation. All right, so let's go on, unless someone has any questions. Verses 10 through 14. Behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you, and stand upright, for now I have been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling. And he said to me, Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before the Lord, for your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision is for days yet to come. And so we've got this touch, again, which I would suggest to you is a characteristic of the Christ. When Christ came in the flesh, he tended to have physical contact with those people who needed it most. Uh, even even those people who ordinarily others would not have touched, like lepers. He touched to strengthen him, encouraged him with his words. He explains that he's been at war with the king, and that Michael, a chief prince, assisted him. I'm just going to guess we're talking about Michael the archangel. We do know that Michael was active at various times. That Michael actually is said in the New Testament to have done what? Disputed with Satan over the body of Moses. So it would not be outside of what we're told about the angel Michael for him to be actively involved in some fashion in what's going on. But again, what we're seeing here is that despite the resistance of humans, and particularly human governments in this case, but despite the resistance, what's coming to pass? God's will, which is a recurring theme in this book. It started off with Nebuchadnezzar trying to stop the will of God, and the will of God came about. And it's just repeated that over and over again with the people of God being set for destruction, but God delivering them despite the actions of men. And the ultimate realization that God rules over the affairs of men, particularly applied in this context to governments, not necessarily individuals, although individuals work into that, because Nebuchadnezzar, as an individual, was humbled by God, right? But he was humbled by God for what purpose? Why Nebuchadnezzar? Why wasn't it someone else? There were plenty of arrogant people out there. Why Nebuchadnezzar? Because he was a king. And he was the one who was setting himself up to fight against the will of God when the will of God had been made known to him. He has a vision that terrifies him. He wants an answer. What's it mean? He gets the answer. And then he sets his mind to do what? Stop it from happening. So God is actually acting against the power of Babylon when he humbles Nebuchadnezzar, not Nebuchadnezzar as an individual. God doesn't go, you know what, I don't really like Wesley. I'm going to pick on Wesley and make life hard for him. But I like Greg a lot, so I'm going to give him a good job and make life easy for him. That's not the way it works. At least not in my reading of the scriptures. The reason David prospered, the reason Solomon prospered, not because God just liked them more than he liked other people, but for what purpose? For the nation of Israel. He used them to make the nation prosper. And as the nation prospered, what happened to them individually? They also prospered. By the way, so did everyone else, just not to the degree that they did, which is pretty common for life, right? If our nation goes well, do we all prosper? Sure, but some people prosper more than others, right? And a lot of times it's the people who are at the top of the pecking order that prosper the most. That's not new. So anyway, that's kind of what we see going on here. It introduces the idea of spiritual conflict behind earthly things. There was some kind of spiritual conflict that was going on for 21 days before the time was right for God to appear and make these things known to Daniel. And that's really what this is saying. Not that God was thwarted for 21 days, but that God was waiting for the circumstances to be right and actively making the circumstances right for these events to come to pass. And this introduces the idea of that spiritual conflict that goes on, by the way, that carries all the way through to Christ, who died at the proper time. And there was all kind of things going on behind the scene. And I say behind the scene, I mean not in the material world, to bring about those events, which culminated with Jesus' own prayer in the garden, where while he was yet praying, they came to arrest him. Angelic ministry, spiritual opposition operate with God within God's sovereign plan. It goes on. Can we see it? There's a great picture that we're given into this. I love the story about a man named Balaam. Anybody know the story of Balaam? Balaam's riding along on a donkey, and the donkey stops. And he starts beating the donkey and saying, "Hey, you've never been like this to me before. Go on." And the donkey doesn't move. So he beats the donkey more. And he gets angry at this useless animal. What's he find out? There's an angel standing in his way. What was God doing? He was protecting him. He was preventing him from going. He didn't know it, but it was happening. There's another scene where there's a great army amassed against the people of God and a prophet that's terrified about the situation. And what does God show him? An army of angels that surrounded them. He said, "You don't have to worry about this." So when we read through, for instance, these battles of Israel, when they go into the promised land, God says, "I'm going to be with you." And they go into the promised land, and the text explicitly says that the opposing army was confused and they began to scatter. Why is that happening? Because God's acting. And I think we need to understand that there are things going on that we cannot see. And we need to trust that God is preserving, keeping, and making certain that his plan plays out exactly the way he wants it to. And he does all that without removing your or my ability to make decisions for ourselves about what we're going to do. We're going to talk about that actually, I think, in this morning's lesson. If it's not this morning's, it's tonight's, but I'm pretty sure it's this morning's. And if it's not, I may switch them. I don't know. We'll see. Appreciate your presence, your participation. If the Lord wills, we will pick up in verse 15 and the prophetic preview that is at this point given to Daniel and to us by extension, because Daniel wrote it for our learning. Anybody?
I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk, dear Lord, close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea.